All right, well, good morning, everyone. We're going to kick the program off here today. First of all, welcome. I'm Rob Atkinson, president of ITIF, and I think we have a fantastic program today. Thank you, everybody. And we're really pleased to be able to celebrate our 10th anniversary. I was looking online what you're supposed to buy for your spouse on the 10th anniversary, and it said aluminum. So I was thinking, given our fear and loathing of technology, that we should give everybody here aluminum tinfoil hats that they could all wear. But we decided not to do that. Before I introduce David Hart, who's going to introduce our two members of Congress here, I just want to really thank, from the bottom of my heart, Bernard Schwartz, who has underwritten this conference, who's been a longtime supporter and friend of ITIF, committed to our work on trying to restore U.S. competitiveness and U.S. investment. Unfortunately, Bernard couldn't be here today, but if it wasn't for his support on this, there's no way we could have done this conference. So, thank you, Bernard. So I'm going to introduce David Hart, who David has the distinction of being the very first ITIF board member. He took a chance 10 years ago when I asked him if he would join our board. David is a professor at George Mason University School of Public Policy, and he focuses his research on technology policy, including high-skill immigration. Prior to that, he was at the Harvard Kennedy School. So, David?
Thanks, Rob. It's a real pleasure and honor to have been asked to serve on the board and to see this organization grow into the really important and effective organization that it is. And I'm really proud to be the first to be able to salute your leadership and the accomplishments of the team. So congratulations on reaching 10. Now you're as old as a fifth grader. And I guess you've proven that you're smarter than a fifth grader. And we're waiting for Washington to catch up with that. So one of the key qualities of ITIF is its bipartisanship, and that's symbolized by the two honorary co-chairs who it's my privilege to introduce. First, Darrell Issa. He represents the 49th District in California, has served in that role since 2001, member of the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committee, and chair of the Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. And before coming to Congress, he was the founder of a car security and audio products firm. And then the second co-chair is Eshoo, represents California's 18th district since 1993. She serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and is a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. And before coming to Congress, she served on the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors. So, Congressman Issa, thank you.
What happened to that prom picture Anna and I were going to get? I thought we were going to do that really nice picture. I need an update. I really do. I think Laura Tyson and I need an update too. But it is amazing what a small town Washington is. About 20 years ago, I started coming here regularly for the Electronic Industries Association, which became the Electronic Industries Alliance, which broke into pieces and today are a whole bunch of trade associations, in a town where everything changes except the need to get government involved or out of the way. And I think in the case of information technology, in the case of this 10 years, we have all gotten, and Anna and I have had a front row seat, we've all gotten an opportunity to see both. We've gotten to see the explosion of the internet, the explosion of information on the internet, the explosion of information that is indexed and collated and made into usable information that can be both marketed and used by the public in ways that historically we would spend a very small fortune or a large fortune to do. The amazing thing is that government has not yet screwed this up. But we're trying. We're trying every day. And it is really what I think in your first 10 years you've gotten successfully to do, which is to have government reasonably enable mostly by doing nothing. And now in the next 10 years, there are a huge amount of questions about what will government do. and I'll just tick through a couple of them because I've been told I can only speak for 45 minutes and then Anna gets the next hour. No, but in all seriousness, we have not dealt with copyright reform, and I'll just give you an answer from Anna, Eshoo, in my home state. The state of California is now considering changing the default on copyright to everything the government does is inherently default copyrighted, meaning that if you go to any event, anything, anywhere that is published by the state of California, the presumption, if AB, whatever the number is, I lose track of them because the governor has to, of either party has to veto about 2/3 of them. So I usually wait till they're a bad law and then I try to remember the number that caused it. But imagine if everything that every state did and everything that the federal government did became copyrighted at a time in which the Copyright Office is unable actually to quickly and expeditiously tell you who to go to if in fact you want to buy something. And of course, is this a new form of taxation? The largest single tax increase in American history would be for all of government's activities directly and indirectly to be copyrighted. Because if the state of California can copyright all information, wouldn't that include UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC San Diego's activities all? Now, I'm a big fan of copyright. I'm a big fan of intellectual property, and I'm sure everyone in this room wants the intellectual property they created to be protected. But if we protect everything the way Spain wanted to, then in fact we will have nothing. Spain recently, and many of you are way ahead of this, they determined that Google, the greatest enemy ever formed on the face of the earth after Microsoft, and I don't know who will be next, but there's always one, Google could not do a search and show you a few words from a newspaper in Spain without paying a copyright. Now that made a lot of sense to everyone except Google, who said, okay, fine, we just won't give you anything from Spanish newspapers. And then they backed off, realizing that they were actually the beneficiary of that small amount of fair use it takes to drive somebody to your website where, in fact, you are free to charge them if you want to for your IP. That's the bad news. Now I'll give you the good news so that people don't, boo me off the stage quite as quickly. We are going to succeed in spite of all these. California will not successfully change the default to everything is copyrighted. The federal government will not follow suit. Other states will not be able to. We will, in fact, define fair use in a way that allows the intellectual property holder to take and use what they have and be compensated for it, while at the same time, we are able to find out where it is. The passage of the Data Act on an overwhelming basis last Congress is being implemented by this administration, which gives us a lot of access to usable government data. And last but not least, the Internet of Things is succeeding with the only help from Congress being briefings and a caucus that observes what's happening so fast that each time we have one of our caucus meetings, people look and say, I didn't know that, and somebody else says, oh, here's how it works. So as you continue to gather for the next 10-year look forward, let's just remember that the last 10 years we had great challenges, great threats, and we managed to avoid most of them. The next 10 years have equally great threats, and hopefully as an organization, what you're doing is planning to inform Congress in a way in which we do that which we need to do to help move along this process, some of which is international, and at the same time that we don't do those things which inherently sound like a great idea until you run the scenario of what would happen the next day and the day after. By the way, this was not my prepared speech, which was much rosier. But I do think that when you're dealing with a decade of success in Washington and looking forward to a very big role, you need to talk seriously, and hopefully that's what we'll tee up for you here today. Anna, am I officially introducing you? Because I want that prom picture, and there's a cameraman here. You think I'm kidding? Okay, Anna and I actually served on the on Energy and Commerce together for 2 years before I took a leave of absence, which, by the way, was about 12 years ago.
Okay, so you want to do picture?
I want to get this picture. I was
Okay,
promised
come on,
a
Rob.
picture.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
You guys think we don't want pictures? Of course. Now I want a copy of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. How are you? Good. It's wonderful to be with you. I want to first obviously acknowledge my colleague, Darrell, Issa, fellow Californian. The mantra around the country is that no one works with anyone in Congress, together from either side of both sides of the aisle. It's not the case with us. There are so many times where we're proud of it, and I look forward to more of it, because the areas that his committees has jurisdiction over, and the committee that I'm on, are very powerful. So when we get to work together, we can really produce something that is good and important for the country. So it's great to be with you, Darrell. To Rob Atkinson and to the board, I pay tribute to you. Happy anniversary. You're 10 years old. 10 years old, yeah. ITIF has really been an important nonpartisan resource for policymakers in Congress. And that's an essential. That is an essential, because what comes in from the outside very often are the ingredients that we absorb and then try to build into our work. Congress is a reactive institution. I think many people don't realize that. So the work that you do and the advocacy that you bring to the Hill is so important. You've earned rave reviews in a very, very short period of time, including being ranked by the University of Pennsylvania as the top science and technology think tank in the United States and #2 in the world. That's extraordinary in a very short period of time. 10 years, well, at my stage of life, it seems like 10 years just whizzes by. So you're an immense source of pride to me and to many, and I thank you for the work that you've done. I think that you're making an important difference, so I salute all of you, most especially Rob and his superb leadership, certainly the board that has taken risks, because when you take risks, sometimes things don't work out. But you had the courage to step out there, to recognize that there was a space that needed to be filled, and I salute you for it. I had a delightful evening last night that Rob and the board hosted. It was a salon-type conversation, and it was around the paper, the report that the organization issued yesterday. And it's all about public and private investment and the decrease of it and the effect it's having on our overall economy. People spoke about what is troubling, and that so many Americans feel that they're left behind. They don't see a bright future for themselves and their families. We all have a responsibility to address this. There's someone that's here that I haven't seen in a long time. I'm so thrilled to see her, Laura Tyson, who knows so much about this and led with great intellect and grace and effectiveness as the chair of economic advisors in the Clinton administration when I first came to Congress. So I'm thrilled to see you, Laura, and I'm so glad that you're a part of this. Now, the world was really a very different place when ITIF was founded 10 years ago. Today, we have smartphones, and we spoke about this last night, that put more technology in the palm of our hands than NASA used to go to the moon. So when you reach in your pocket and you take out that device, It's extraordinarily powerful. We have an entire app economy built around these devices. We're connecting everyday appliances to the Internet of Things. And we're close to making self-driving cars a reality rather than a dream. And I see these test cars all over my district. I don't know whether I want to get in one yet. The idea, if you're going to get in a car, I like the idea of driving, but it'll happen. It will happen because so many of the other things weren't even dreamed of, and now they have integrated themselves, and it's been transformative across all sectors. Now, representing a good part of Silicon Valley in the House, I've seen firsthand some of the most exciting and compelling ideas of our time come to life. It's been possible, it was made possible because we fostered an environment that allows innovators to thrive. But that's not the end of the equation. We have to keep looking to the future because we're looked to help shape our collective future. It's not just members of Congress, it's all of us, and certainly all of the participants of this organization. And I think that ITIF does that every day to make sure that we put policies in place that keep America competitive. I said last night that I'm not interested in America being 17th in one sector and 12th in another or 7th in another. We have the capacity to continue being a great and a good nation. Honestly, I wouldn't be here or run for re-election in Congress if I didn't have that deep faith in our country and the capacity to do so much. Now, today you've brought together a group of thinkers and policymakers because we need to talk about how we can spur investment in our country. The numbers are not good. The numbers are not good. Actually, I don't agree with my colleague, Darrell, but he left, so we'll debate that another day, or I'll tell him when I see him on the floor today. The investment has to come, obviously, from the private sector, from the private side, as well as the public side. When investments are made in what I call the 5 pillars, and I spoke about this last evening, research and development, education, capital formation, infrastructure, and immigration. When we invest in those 5, America goes this way. And when we don't, the arrows point down. I don't think there's a secret sauce. I think if we're looking for a secret sauce, it's a misdirection. These are the pillars of our economy. These are the pillars of our economy. Now, new big ideas need to be created. And we spoke about that last night with some of the participants at the dinner. We know that the role that public investment plays in research and development and basic research and development promotes so much innovation. It was publicly funded research, and I think we take our successes for granted. We always love our history once it's been made, a long time ago. We don't always appreciate making history, but we have. That publicly funded research created the internet, but public investment this year will be the lowest share of our GDP since the Russians launched Sputnik in the 1950s. Now, I don't think that's synonymous with what the word America represents and means. In 2015, it was 40% lower than it was in the late 1980s. And to restore it to the level of the late 80s, we would need to spend $65 billion a year more per year. Incentivizing the private sector R&D is also important. I think Congress took a big step forward in making the R&D tax credit permanent, but we didn't pay for it. We didn't pay for it. So that's charged to, if you're interested in deficits and national debt, collectively, those very important extenders were not paid for. So there's the plus, and then there's the minus to it. For every dollar we lose in tax revenue due to the credit, though, we gain $2 of additional private sector research. A 2011 study estimated that strengthening and making the R&D tax credit permanent would increase private sector R&D by $15 billion, with a B, annually, and create 300,000 research-related jobs. So this is not small potatoes. It's very, very important. The public sector needs to invest more in education, from preschool through college, so that our citizens are prepared and compete and they can compete and innovate in this century. We need more investment, obviously, in the STEAM fields, and we should be rewarding teachers who commit to focusing in these fields. The richest resource America has is her people. But if we don't invest in our people, then these shortcomings, and you can see in a presidential election year, not only pockets of unhappiness in the country, but whole regions that feel, of people that feel that they have been left out. And nothing is as dynamic as investment in education. That brings more back to the Treasury than anything else. It is singularly the most dynamic of investments. So that is an essential, and we're falling short there. So I think my message today to you is that there isn't any secret sauce. We already know from our experience over decades and decades where we make the areas where we make the investments on the public side and what that spurs for our country. And of course, the tax code incenting and motivating the outcomes that we're looking for, those are all essentials for our country. So I look forward to continuing to work and partner with all of you, with this really superb organization to championing these goals in Congress. I think that we have come up far short on political will. Far short on political will. This is all a matter of making a decision. We already know what the outcomes are. And so I hope that these ideas become contagious in Congress because when we don't play the essential role the federal government plays in these areas, the private sector does what it does, but it also needs a partner across the board, across the federal government to do the right thing. And when we do, the American people win. I want historians to define the 21st century as an American century. So we all have a collective challenge together in order to accomplish that. Thank you for the work you've done. Thank you for what I know you're going to do, and count on me to work with you to accomplish the goals. Thank you, everyone, and happy birthday.
Okay. Well, thank you, Congresswoman Eshoo and Representative Issa. It's so nice of you to join us this morning. So before we jump into the panel, I just want to make a few kind of framing remarks to put this into context. In some ways, I think what we've seen over the last 10 years, as the Congresswoman talked about, a pretty rapid progression in a lot of technologies. We see the innovation all around us, And yet one area we don't see it is, kind of to paraphrase Robert Solow, who famously said in the late 1980s, we see computers everywhere but in the productivity statistics. So we see innovation, but we have not been seeing productivity. And I think the real question is why, and what's the role of public and private investment in that? Let me just give you a few stats, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Then, back when we started, only 30% of Americans subscribed to broadband at speeds of about 1.5 megabits a second. Now, over 80% do at speeds that are 10 times faster. Back then, 3G wireless was just emerging. There were no smartphones. Today, we're leading the world in LTE. 80% of people have smartphones. We're rapidly moving into 5G systems. Then, the fastest computer in the world could perform calculations at about half a petaflop per second. You don't need to know what petaflop means. It sounds a lot. Today, the fastest computer in the world is 140 times faster, 55 petaflops a second. The only problem with that is that the fastest computer in the world is in China, not in the US. 10 gigabytes of storage 10 years ago cost $6. Today, it's less than 3 cents. There was no talk of autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, drones, blockchains, IoT, big data. These really weren't even discussed back then. And now, all of those technologies are either on the market or certainly in beta testing. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we simply have not seen the results of that as we might hope in the productivity statistics. So from 2008 until 2016, productivity in the US, labor productivity, grew 1.2% annually per year. That was about half the rate of the growth from 1995 to 2008. So productivity decelerated, if you will, going from essentially a fairly robust pace in the 90s through the mid-2000s down to the lowest rate of growth in the post-war period. In fact, the last 2 quarters, according to the BLS, we've experienced negative productivity growth. If we counted that as a recession, which is what I think we should count, we're in a productivity recession right now. So the question is why? And there's a lot of different research and evidence on that, and the next panel in particular will get into that. But I think there's a fair amount of evidence that it's not just a cyclical issue from the Great Recession. It's not a measurement issue either. A number of good studies that have come out of that. But it appears that a key factor in the productivity slowdown has been the slowdown in investment. The two are related. We gain productivity largely by using more and better tools and using them more effectively. So for example, when you look at the 3 main categories of private sector investment, capital, equipment, and software, training and education, and R&D, what you see are trends in all 3 of them that are troubling, to say the least. Net investment in equipment and software was averaging, each year we were adding on net 2% of GDP. So in other words, companies were investing the equivalent of 2% of GDP, adding new equipment and software in the 1990s. In the 2010s, that number has fallen essentially in half. According to the Roosevelt Institute, investment has grown more slowly since the Great Recession of any post-war recovery that we've had. The result is, unfortunately, that workers now have fewer tools. Capital stock, in other words, the amount of capital that a worker has to work with in inflation-adjusted dollars has fallen from 42,000 in 1995 to just 32,000 today. So that's one reason why productivity, I think, has not been going up as much, is workers simply have fewer tools. They don't have the most modern tools. At the same time, corporate spending on training their workforce has fallen 30% as a share of GDP. Corporations used to spend much more on training their workers than they do today. And finally, corporate R&D has not lagged as much, but it is a tad lower than what it was in 2000 as a share of GDP. But more troubling, the share of investment that companies make in basic research and applied research compared to their R&D has fallen from 30% to 26%. So there's been this decline or stagnation in private investment. And I wish I could give you good news that the story in public investment is actually even worse. As Congresswoman Eshoo noted, we're investing at the federal government less in R&D as a share of GDP than prior to Sputnik. Why did we make this big investment in R&D in 1956? Sputnik. We were scared. We saw the challenge, and we responded for 40 years. And now it appears that that never happened, and we're going back to sort of that pre-era. If you look at federal investments in water and transportation infrastructure, that's down from $96 billion a year in 2002 to $69 billion a year today in inflation-adjusted dollars. We see that every time you drive in Washington and you're complaining, why is the traffic so bad? It's because we simply have not kept up with infrastructure. Metro, need we say more? Finally, funding for employment and training has fallen by half over the last 20 or so years. Federal government just simply is not investing in that as much as they did. So why have we seen falling investment? What's behind that story? If we don't understand that, it's hard to then say, what should we do about it? Clearly on the public side, the story's pretty straightforward. The big national debt and the budget deficit. And so in the face of that, it's easy to cut discretionary investment spending rather than tackle the harder issues, which is entitlements or individual tax increases. On the private sector decline, the reasons are a little more complicated and I think less firmly well understood. But let me suggest a few possible hypotheses. One, the after-tax cost of investment in the U.S. is relatively high. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, combined with relatively weak investment incentives. Many other countries combine a lower rate and stronger investment incentives, like investment tax credit or first-year expensing and other kinds of things like that. Secondly, there appears to be a growing consensus that there are systemic pressures on publicly held corporations towards short-term investment strategies. There's a 2013 McKinsey quarterly survey of over 1,000 U.S. C-suite executives. It found that 63% said that the pressure to demonstrate short-term financial performance had increased over the last 5 years. And 86% said that their companies would be better off if they shifted to a longer time horizon. That suggests that companies are aware of the challenge, but are constrained in terms of their response. Likewise, a 2011 Federal Reserve Bank of New York study found that changes in management compensation, particularly stock options, has led to reduced investment. So there's something in the market that was rewarding short-termism and not rewarding these kinds of longer-term, more fundamental investments that perhaps could lead to a higher net present value returns for corporations. And then the third factor, I think, is really about what the expected rate of return from investments are. If the tools that companies are able to buy are not as compelling, not as cheap, and not as powerful as they might be, then companies will buy fewer of them. Certainly one of the reasons why we had the investment boom in the 1990s, besides some of the policies that were put in place, was because we had technologies that every company in America needed to buy, and they wanted to buy them as quickly as possible. You could make, I think, a good case that we're not there now with this new emerging technologies that hopefully will be there soon, but we're not there yet, and if we were, perhaps investment would go up. So to close, I think interesting to kind of speculate what are some of the steps that we need to be taking as a nation to restore public and private investment. First of all, I think one is to develop a broadly shared consensus that we have a stake in the investment decisions that industry makes. Unfortunately, there are some free market conservatives who argue that if companies aren't investing, they know best, and who are we to question that? There's one big problem with that, which is that there's a lot of good evidence that there are big externalities from investment, that when companies invest in R&D or even invest in equipment and software, they don't get all of the benefits of that, what economists call externalities or spillovers, and therefore society has a stake in ensuring that companies invest more. At the same time, I think there are some on the left who are frankly ambivalent about investment. It's not uncommon now to read liberal policy scholars who say we are investing too much because what we really ought to be doing is not investing in machines but investing in workers. And what that really is a shorthand for saying, let's not have high productivity, let's just hire a lot of workers and not give them really good tools. And I think it's in part a reflection of, I think, a mistaken view that productivity is leading to fewer jobs. I think it's hard to make that argument for now. We can have a discussion about what might happen in the future. But given that productivity has been so low for the last 8 years, it's hard to say that that's been the cause of a labor market that has not performed quite as well as we might hope. The second area I think we need consensus on is to support robust public sector investment. And clearly, we can have and should have a vigorous debate about the proper size and role of government. That's a good debate to have. But I don't think we should be having a debate about the role of the public sector when it comes to investment. The evidence is so crystal clear that when the federal government invests in infrastructure, in education, and particularly in R&D, that the societal returns and the economic returns are huge. Third, I would argue we need targeted tax policies for investment. Relying on low interest rates alone doesn't appear to do the trick. We've seen that experiment. It doesn't seem to be working. It has the other sort of negative effects of perhaps encouraging non-productive investment, of borrowing credit cards, auto loans, and the like that rely on low interest rates. I think a better strategy would say, could we do things like have first-year expensing in the tax code? And then finally, getting back to this question of sort of the quality and the price of capital goods, I don't think it's unrealistic to say that we should be thinking about our national R&D strategy, other kinds of policies, STEM policies, regulation, and the like, on how we can support the emergence of better technology tools for companies to use. And that's really going to be that's going to be the focus of the last panel. Clearly, there's a suite of technologies that are emerging: robotics, autonomy, artificial intelligence, nano, bio, advanced computing. And if these technologies all can grow faster, get better faster, and have integration, I think we could see a very kind of robust turnaround in investment, growth, and productivity. But do we really want to wait 15 years for that to happen, or do we want to try to accelerate that process?